It was the smell of wet earth that brought me back to Pine Creek 3 years ago. I left behind a corporate cubicle in Chicago and a salary that my colleagues would have thought was crazy to give up. But the 6 acres my grandfather left on the hills outside town called to me in a way that no promotion ever could. My little farm turned into a sustainable paradise. I raised chickens that produced organic eggs, grew vegetables without pesticides, and kept a few goats that gave me fresh milk every morning. The beehives in the orchard attracted pollinators throughout the area. A crystal-clear creek cut across the property, forming a natural border and naturally irrigating everything. Everything changed when Oak Ridge Estates showed up. A luxury condo complex sprang up almost overnight on the land next to mine. Standardized $500,000 houses with perfect lawns and identical gardens. And with them came Susan Miller. The first time Susan showed up at my door, I thought she was making a friendly visit. A woman with perfectly dyed hair, expensive clothes, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm on the board of the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association," she announced, looking disdainfully at my muddy boots. "We need to discuss some issues." The issues, I later learned, were about my very existence. My chickens were making too much noise. My barn needed a new coat of paint. My organic garden was messy and was lowering the value of the neighboring properties. "Oak Ridge has community standards," she explained, handing me a booklet of rules. "Now that this area is developing, we all need to contribute to maintaining property values." I politely explained that my farm had been here long before the condo complex and wasn't subject to their rules. Her smile vanished. "You'll soon realize things have changed around here," Susan said as she walked away. "Pine Creek isn't what it used to be. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this." The letters started coming about a week later. Official notifications from the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association about supposed violations that I needed to fix immediately. I ignored the first ones, until I realized Susan wasn't going to give up easily. The health department showed up to inspect my chicken coop after an anonymous complaint about unsanitary conditions. The inspector looked embarrassed. "Everything's perfect here," he admitted as he put the forms away. "Actually, I've never seen domestic animal facilities this clean." Then there were complaints about the smell of organic compost, the noise from the goats, even about the wildflowers I let grow naturally in parts of my land. Every week, a new complaint. One Saturday afternoon, while I was selling my produce at the local market, Mitchell Anderson approached. An older man with graying hair that Susan always mentioned as the president of our HOA. "Listen, kid. Susan is determined," he said in a low voice. "She's built a career in real estate and has plans for this area. Your little farm, well, it doesn't fit into those plans." Some condo neighbors started avoiding me in town. Others whispered when I passed by. It was Emily Wilson, a college professor who'd recently moved to Oak Ridge, who warned me about the rumors. "Susan's telling everyone that your farming practices are dangerous, that you're contaminating the groundwater," Emily explained while buying my greens at the market. "It's ridiculous, but a lot of people believe her." The phone call came on a Thursday night. My mom had had a bad fall and needed help in Seattle. I'd have to leave the farm for at least 2 weeks. I called David, my childhood friend and local vet, who agreed to come by every day to feed the animals. I filled up the automatic feeders, reinforced all the fences, and double-checked every door and window. "I have a bad feeling about this," I confessed to David as I handed him the keys. "Susan's been stepping up the threats." "You're just getting paranoid," he laughed. "What could she do? We're in a country ruled by laws." Just to be safe, I set up security cameras at strategic points around the property. They weren't fancy equipment, just basic devices that transmitted to my cell phone. Better than nothing. "Take care," said Emily, who showed up to see me off. "And don't worry about what's happening here. I'll keep an eye on things." On the plane to Seattle, I mentally ran through all the precautions I'd taken. Still, a sense of unease followed me through the entire trip. 15 days later, I returned to Pine Creek, exhausted. My mom was better, but the time away had been grueling, with sleepless nights and constant worry. I couldn't wait to get back to the quiet routine of the farm. The smell of smoke hit me even before I turned onto the dirt road. A sharp, heavy odor that made my stomach drop. I sped up, praying I was wrong, but I wasn't. Where once stood my little red barn, there were now only charred beams and ashes. The chicken coop was completely gone. The garden, which had taken years to cultivate properly, was now just a burnt-out rectangle of land. The beehives, destroyed. I got out of the car in shock, my knees weak. The silence was deafening. No clucking from chickens, no bleating from goats. Just the wind moving through the ashes. David showed up while I was still staring at the devastation. It happened the day before yesterday, he explained, his voice choking up. I tried calling you, but you were on the plane. When I got here, it was too late. The animals? His silence answered that enough. While we surveyed the wreckage, a luxury SUV pulled up at the entrance. Susan Miller got out, followed by Mitchell Anderson. Both were dressed formally and had serious expressions. Tragic, commented Susan, with not a hint of sincerity. But I must say, it was predictable. What do you mean? I asked, anger rising. Mitchell handed over a folder. This property was recently incorporated into Oak Ridge Estates jurisdiction through a municipal rezoning. Your facilities were violating several HOA codes. We acted according to the law to correct serious violations, Susan added. You received multiple notifications. You burned my farm? The Homeowners Association simply enforced the rules, Susan replied, with an almost imperceptible smile. Welcome officially to Oak Ridge Estates. I spent the next few days in a daze, sleeping on David's couch, unable to face the wreckage of my life. I lost everything. Years of work, my animals, my carefully developed crops. It was Jessica, my cousin who's a lawyer, who pulled me out of my despair. She came from Portland as soon as she heard what happened. Let's have a look at this rezoning, she insisted, spreading maps and documents across the kitchen table. Susan is lying about something. I can feel it. We spent hours poring over official municipality documents. That's when we noticed. The creek, I pointed at the topographic map. See how it cuts through my property? Jessica nodded, her eyes lighting up. And according to the official rezoning boundaries, the creek serves as the natural border. Only the eastern part of your property was included in the condo. We checked 3 times to be sure. It was clear. The chicken coop, the barn, and 80% of my land officially remained outside Oak Ridge Estates jurisdiction. They had no legal authority, Jessica concluded. What they did was nothing short of criminal property destruction at the very least. That afternoon, Emily arrived with crucial information. As a sociology professor, she had dug deep into Susan Miller's background. She isn't just a member of the HOA, Emily revealed. I discovered that Susan is a silent partner in Westview Development, the developer who built Oak Ridge and is trying to expand the condo. The pieces started coming together. The hostility wasn't just about an aesthetic intolerance. There was money behind it all. We need to recover the footage from the security cameras, I said, feeling a spark of hope for the first time. I think they captured a lot more than we imagined. The head office of the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association was located in a model home set up at the complex's entrance. Immaculate white walls, furniture too expensive to be comfortable, and a huge framed photo of Susan and Mitchell cutting a ribbon at the opening. It was HOA meeting night, and Jessica had convinced me to attend. Confront them on their home turf, she argued as we parked, where everyone can see what's happening. We walked into the middle of a discussion about the need to change the seasonal flowers at the entrance of the complex. Susan was leading the meeting like a general, while Mitchell took notes on a tablet. About 30 residents were seated in perfectly arranged rows. When Susan saw me, her expression hardened for a moment before transforming into an artificial smile. Ah, our new neighbor has decided to join us. Welcome. I'm not your neighbor, I replied, keeping my voice steady as I made my way down the central aisle. And I'm here to set a few things straight. Jessica set up the projector on the table while I faced the curious looks of the residents. Many had never seen me in person, knowing me only from the distorted stories Susan had told. 3 days ago, my property was criminally destroyed, I began, my throat tightening with emotion. My animals died. Everything I built over years was reduced to ashes. Susan tried to interrupt. That's not on the agenda for this meeting. We can discuss your concerns at Mrs. Miller claimed that my property was incorporated into the complex through rezoning, I continued, ignoring her. She's lying. The murmur that spread through the room gave me the courage to press on. Jessica projected the official rezoning map on the wall. As you can clearly see, the creek running through my property is the natural border. Only a small portion of my land was affected by the rezoning. The rest remains legally outside this association's jurisdiction. Mitchell adjusted his glasses, scrutinizing the map with growing discomfort. Some residents leaned forward, intrigued. This is just a technicality, Susan declared, dismissing the issue with a wave of her hand. The point is that your property is lowering Oak Ridge's real estate values. What matters, I corrected, is that you committed a crime, and I have the evidence. Jessica moved to the next slide, footage from my security cameras. The first video showed Susan walking alone on my property after midnight. carrying a bag. These images were captured the night before the fire, I explained, as the room fell into an absolute silence. The next video showed Susan pouring something around the barn and the chicken coop. Even with the limited quality of the nighttime recording, it was unmistakable. Mrs. Miller didn't just order the destruction of my property, I continued. She personally set the fire, knowing I was out of town. The silence in the room was deafening. Susan remained still, her face like a pale mask. It was Emily who broke the silence, rising from her chair. I've been wondering why someone would risk so much to destroy a small sustainable farm, she said, looking straight at Susan. So I started investigating. Mrs. Miller isn't just on the board here. She's a partner in Westview Development. I projected on the screen the business documents Emily had uncovered, showing Susan's stake in the developer. Westview has plans to expand Oak Ridge, I continued. And guess what? The perfect land for that expansion is exactly where my farm is located. The murmur grew louder. Mitchell looked genuinely shocked, staring at Susan in disbelief. This is absurd, Susan finally snapped, standing up. These accusations are slanderous and— I already called the authorities, I interrupted. The evidence was turned over to the sheriff this morning. As if on cue, the doors opened and 2 uniformed police officers entered the room. Officer Johnson, someone I'd known since I was a kid, stepped forward with a grave expression. Susan Miller, we need you to come with us for questioning about the criminal fire. As Susan was escorted out, several residents approached me. Some offered support. Others apologized for having believed her lies. Mitchell stayed seated, staring at his papers. When he finally looked up, he seemed to have aged 10 years. I didn't know, he murmured. I swear I didn't know about the fire. Susan assured me we were acting within the law. I didn't answer immediately. Part of me wanted to confront him, to accuse him of collusion, but his despair seemed genuine. You had a duty to check the facts before acting, I finally said. That negligence destroyed my life. We left the meeting with mixed feelings of victory. Susan would face justice, but that wouldn't bring back my animals or the years of lost work. Emily caught up with us in the parking lot. This is only the beginning, she declared. We're going to rebuild your farm, and we're going to turn this community into something better. The district attorney's office was austere, with shelves of legal books and framed certificates covering the walls. Prosecutor Barrett, a man in his 50s with a permanently serious expression, was leafing through the police report while Jessica and I waited. The evidence against Mrs. Miller is substantial, he concluded, closing the folder. The security footage is particularly convincing. And what about the motive? I asked. We found out about her connection with Westview Development, but that seems too extreme? Barrett finished, nodding. I agree. That's why we dug deeper into the investigation after her arrest. He opened another folder, revealing financial documents and printed emails. Mrs. Miller's situation was more desperate than we thought. Westview is on the brink of bankruptcy due to failed investments in other counties. Jessica carefully went over the documents. She put everything she had into the company. And more, Barrett confirmed. Her only chance of financial recovery was the expansion of Oak Ridge Estates, specifically in the direction of your property. A new luxury shopping center was planned for that location. A detective entered the room carrying a laptop. We found this in her office, he explained, opening the computer. I wanted you to see it. On the screen appeared a digital architectural projection, an idealized version of an expanded Oak Ridge Estates. In the place of my farm, there was a commercial complex with boutiques, fancy restaurants, and a spa. The project is called Oak Ridge Village, the detective explained. According to the recovered emails, Susan was about to lose everything if this development didn't move forward quickly. Her desperation grew when investors threatened to pull their support. And she saw my farm as the only obstacle, I concluded, a chill running down my spine. Barrett closed the laptop. She tried various legal tactics first. The complaints, the notices, the social pressure. When those failed, especially after discovering that the rezoning didn't cover her entire property as she expected, she decided to solve the problem with fire, I finished. Exactly. And she made mistakes because of her desperation. She didn't realize you had installed cameras. She didn't check the details of the rezoning carefully enough. We left the office with confirmation that Susan would face serious charges: criminal arson, animal cruelty, property destruction, fraud. The list kept growing as the investigation advanced. In the parking lot, we found Mitchell waiting. He looked as if he hadn't slept well, with deep dark circles and rumpled clothes, a strange sight for someone usually so put together. I need to talk to you, he insisted. Please. Reluctantly, we agreed to meet at the corner cafe. Mitchell nervously stirred his coffee as he spoke. I found more documents in the HOA office, he confessed. Susan forged my signature on several documents related to the rezoning. She's been manipulating all of us for years. He slid a folder across the table. There's evidence here that she tried to bribe municipal officials to speed up approvals, altered association records, and diverted funds to Westview. Jessica quickly examined the documents. This will only strengthen the case against her even more. Why are you giving us this? I asked, still wary of his intentions. Mitchell stared into his coffee cup. Because I failed as the president of this association. I believed her lies because it was easier. I never questioned her motives because she presented everything as necessary to protect our investments. He looked up, visibly shaken. I was foolish and negligent. Your farm was partly destroyed because of my inaction. I can't undo that, but I can help make sure Susan faces all the consequences. We took the new documents straight to the prosecutor, who informed us that Susan had refused any plea deal, insisting on her innocence despite the overwhelming evidence. She really believes she was acting for the greater good of Oak Ridge, Barrett commented incredulously. In her distorted mind, burning your farm was justifiable to improve the community. Greed can dress itself up as virtue in some very impressive ways, Jessica replied. Pine Creek County Court rarely filled up, but on the day of Susan Miller's trial, not a single seat was empty. Oak Ridge residents mixed with local farmers, all curious about a case that had divided the community. Susan entered in handcuffed, wearing a conservative navy blue suit. Her attorney, a man from Chicago in a suit that was outrageously expensive by local standards, maintained a confident expression. Behind her, Westview development executives occupied the front row, tense and watching every move. The trial lasted 3 days, with detailed testimonies about the destruction of my property, the security camera evidence, and the incriminating documents found by Mitchell. The defense argued that Susan had acted under extreme pressure and sincerely believed she was protecting Oak Ridge Estates. When it was my turn to testify, I looked directly at Susan. I lost more than just property, I explained to the jury. Those animals were a part of my life. Every plant, every tree was nurtured over the years. It wasn't just a farm. It was my home, my livelihood, my dream. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Susan remained expressionless as Judge Ramirez announced the sentence: 6 years in prison, plus full financial restitution. This court recognizes not only the material damage but also the emotional impact and the loss of a sustainable way of life that benefited the whole community, the judge declared. The civil compensation phase began immediately after the criminal case wrapped up. With Jessica's help, we filed a lawsuit against Susan personally, Westview Development, and the Homeowners Association. Emily organized a coalition of condo residents who backed my cause. Most people here never approved of Susan's tactics, she explained during a meeting at her place. Many moved to Oak Ridge precisely to be closer to nature, not to destroy it. The civil mediation happened 2 weeks later. Westview, on the brink of bankruptcy after the scandal, offered a substantial settlement to avoid further negative publicity. The association, now temporarily led by Emily, agreed to pay a significant amount and set up safeguards to prevent future abuses of power. Besides the financial compensation, Emily proposed during mediation, we'd like to formally establish that the property will never be subject to the HOA's rules, regardless of any future rezoning. The final document, signed by all parties, included not only a compensation of $700,000, but also permanent legal guarantees over my agricultural autonomy. The creek that had once saved my property was officially recognized as the definitive border, protected by a conservation easement. The money would help rebuild everything, and even better than before. But there was a deeper issue to resolve. On a cold autumn morning, Mitchell showed up at the property as I began clearing the debris. He had resigned as HOA president and seemed different, less rigid, more human. I came to help, he offered simply, wearing jeans and work boots instead of his usual formal attire. If you'll have me? I hesitated. Part of me still held him partly responsible for his passive complicity. Why? Because I need to do this, he replied, looking at the ruins of the barn. I can't change what happened, but I can help rebuild. That day, Mitchell worked silently alongside me, removing burnt beams and clearing debris. The next day, 3 more Oak Ridge residents showed up. By the following week, there were 10. Emily explained while everyone worked. People realized they were being manipulated. Susan sold the idea that your farm was a threat, when in fact it was exactly the kind of sustainable initiative our region needs. David, who had brought extra tools, added, This goes beyond financial compensation. It's about rebuilding trust, rebuilding community. The legal process finally ended when the last document was signed, guaranteeing that my property would remain free from HOA jurisdiction forever. But the real healing process was just beginning, brick by brick, board by board, one day at a time. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. Spring. Almost a year after the fire, and my farm had literally risen from the ashes. The new barn, painted the same traditional red as the old one, now housed a growing herd of rescued goats. The expanded chicken coop was home to nearly 50 happy chickens, including some rare breeds I'd always wanted to raise. But the biggest transformation wasn't in the physical structures. It was a sunny Saturday morning, and the old pasture now had a covered structure with rustic wooden tables. Oak Ridge residents mingled with local farmers, exchanging not just produce, but also stories and knowledge. Our first community farmers market, observed Emily, now the official HOA president, as we organized the stalls. Who would have thought, huh? I smiled watching Mitchell demonstrating to a group of kids how to plant tomato seedlings in recycled pots. The former financial executive had discovered an unexpected passion for regenerative gardening. This is the difference between deep and shallow transplanting, he patiently explained. The roots need space to develop a strong system. With the settlement money, I not only rebuilt the original structures, but also implemented sustainable technologies I'd always dreamed of. Solar panels covered the barn's roof, providing clean energy throughout the property. An advanced rainwater harvesting system fed strategically placed reservoirs. "Are we ready for our first official class?" asked David, adjusting the whiteboard in our new community space. "Almost," I replied, watching the group of 15 Oak Ridge residents who'd signed up for the Introduction to Urban Farming course. "I'm still nervous about this whole teaching thing." "You're gonna crush it," he assured me. "No one knows this subject better than you." The Pine Creek Community Center for Sustainable Agriculture, the official name we gave the project, now occupied a significant part of my property. With the settlement and additional donations from Oak Ridge residents, we built an educational space where we held weekly workshops on topics like composting, organic gardening, and responsible animal husbandry. Jessica, who had temporarily moved to Pine Creek to oversee the rebuilding process, watched the bustle with satisfaction. "When I think that all this started with a disaster," she commented, "it's almost poetic." "I'd have preferred to skip the disaster part," I replied, still feeling a sting remembering the animals lost in the fire. "Of course," she agreed, patting my shoulder. "But look at what you built from it. Not just a better farm, but an entire transformed community." The new HOA board, led by Emily, had completely rewritten the rules for Oak Ridge Estates. Instead of arbitrary bans on aesthetics, the focus now was on sustainable practices. Edible gardens were encouraged in backyards. Small chicken coops were allowed with proper guidelines. Rainwater harvesting wasn't just permitted, it was actively promoted with reduced association fees. "The new Oak Ridge Master Plan will be presented next week," Emily announced, as we helped a family choose their first chickens for their little urban coop. "Guess which property will be officially recognized as the community's educational partner?" I smiled, still getting used to the idea. From public enemy number one to official community resource. Who would have thought? The morning went on, and the community market buzzed with activity. Local producers were selling artisanal cheeses, honey, organic vegetables. Craftspeople offered products made from recycled or sustainable materials. At an improvised table, children learned to make seed bombs to attract pollinators. When I began my first formal composting class, I looked at the attentive faces in front of me. Some were longtime Pine Creek neighbors. Others, Oak Ridge residents who would have once turned their noses up at the idea of getting their hands in the dirt. All united by a genuine desire to learn more sustainable practices. "Composting isn't just about recycling waste," I explained, showing different stages of the process. "It's a perfect metaphor for transformation. What seems disposable actually holds the seed for new life." After the class, while we were packing up the materials, Mitchell came over. He rarely spoke about Susan, who was serving her sentence in a state prison. But today he seemed reflective. "I got a letter from her," he said, helping me organize the tools. "She still believes she was right, that she was improving the community. Some people just can't see beyond their narrow perspective," I replied. He nodded, looking around at the vibrant market, at the children playing in the pasture with the goats, at the new residents learning how to extract honey from the newly installed beehives. "The ironic thing," Mitchell mused, "is that she actually ended up improving the community, just in a way she never imagined." As evening set in, when the last visitor had left, I sat on my rebuilt porch, watching the creek that once saved my property flow peacefully. The clear waters reflected the orange sky, creating a display of colors that no planned condo complex could ever replicate. Emily joined me with 2 cups of herbal tea brewed from the new medicinal garden. "You know what impresses me the most?" she said, handing me a cup. "How something as destructive as that fire could eventually bring so much good." I took a sip of the tea, savoring the aroma of mint and lavender. "I guess it's like the compost I talked about today. Even from destruction, life finds a way to start over. Stronger, richer, more diverse." The new barn bell chimed softly in the evening breeze, calling everyone for one last round of animal care before nightfall. I stood up, feeling deep gratitude for the journey that, despite all the pain, had brought me here. The real strength of a community, I concluded, is not found in its uniformity, but in how it welcomes and celebrates its differences. I walked toward the barn, where the goats patiently awaited. On the horizon, the lights of Oak Ridge Estates began to shine, not as a threatening presence anymore, but as part of a larger ecosystem that had finally found its balance.